Welcome back to Season 2 of That's So Second Millennium, the podcast where we explore how science and religion can coexist, because they can, and what they can produce together if we let them, because your third millennium will be a whole lot brighter if you do. Your hosts are Bill Schmidt and me, Paul Giesting. Welcome back. Today we continue our run-up to the Society of Catholic Scientists Conference coming up at Notre Dame. Bill and I discuss the themes of the conference and the individual speakers, have a little bit of fun about discussing academic talk titles and associated hijinks. We're sort of in an experimental phase with our sound quality and sound technology. Zencastr has apparently gotten itself associated with a demon on Bill's computer. So if Bill sounds a little bit down at the beginning of the podcast, that's because he had spent, I think an hour fighting his laptop before we started recording. And of course we had to fall back to good old freeconferencecall.com. So again, not the greatest sound quality, but by God, it actually freaking works. So we're going to keep working on that. I'm also looking for new places to record. The place I tried is a little echoey. You'll probably notice that. So, and every time I do anything, I touch anything on that desk where I had my laptop stationed, you'll hear this thumping sound. So we're doing our best. If it's good content, give us the benefit of the doubt. We appreciate you listening.
Welcome back to That's So Second Millennium, the Science and Religion podcast from a Catholic perspective. This is episode 61. We are in our countdown to the Society of Catholic Scientists Conference that's going to be held at the University of Notre Dame this coming June 7th to 9th. So this episode, we're just going to discuss on our own the topics to be covered at the conference. They're really fascinating subjects. They are kind of divergent. They're under the general umbrella of what does it mean to be human? And they're going to come at that question from a number of different angles. Obviously, we're at a turning point in human history for a lot of reasons. A lot of our capacities for interacting with our environment and with ourselves and for understanding ourselves are changing very quickly. So the conference is going to deal with questions of both human origins, so looking at our scientific understanding of where we're at as far as understanding or the possibility of guessing, at least, or coming up with some sort of hypothesis about when we gained all these distinctive human features, such as consciousness, qualia, free will, that sort of thing. And also, at least, getting a little bit of perspective on how the image of human origins that has been produced by science compares to the account that's in Genesis and in the rest of Jewish Christian scriptures. So that's one broad theme. There will be a number of talks on the question of evolution from a broader perspective of what does it mean. There'll be one fascinating, the fascinating talk title I'm looking forward to. It's on Sunday morning, I believe, yes. Evolution and the Eschatological meaning of human nature. So that's going to be an interesting take on it. But there is that question of what does evolution really mean in terms of if that's the world, which you seem to think that. There are certainly good reasons to think that. What does that mean in the context of a universe with providence? And then finally, there will be a lot of talks discussing our increasing ability to modify ourselves by purely biological methods, and to modify ourselves by becoming, as it were, cyborgs, to take these ubiquitous electronic devices that we're creating and make them part of our own bodies and interact with them directly through our neurons and things like that.
It's interesting, Paul, that a lot of the questions about humanness are kind of, in a sense, being asked in the breach. In other words, where a lot of the questions are prompted by an awareness or a concern that some aspect of our humanness or aspects that we had always taken for granted are now suddenly more up for grabs. But not just in a cultural sense, but in an authentically scientific sense. Yeah,
it is one of those things that so often we fail to do any serious thinking about a question until it's, I'm tempted to say it's almost too late. And there are certainly things that have managed to slip into becoming widely accepted, despite the fact that both science and any kind of responsible philosophy would clearly dictate that they should not be. Abortion is obviously, I mean, all sorts of things around our own reproductive cycle, so to speak. We've been merrily traipsing along and engineering that to our heart's content, or
Right.
engineering it off to our heart's content. And yeah, there are no guarantees that that's going to leave us with a workable society.
Yeah.
And the amount of resources that are consumed by, I think about, and of course you can't help but sympathize with people who, resort to in vitro fertilization. It's just so common, and it is so taken for granted in wealthier Western societies that's an option. It's a legitimate option. Of course, I'm going to take that option. And that has run ahead of our, really thinking seriously about whether we have the right to do that, whether we should use the ability that we have to do that.
Right.
So I hope we talk about that, especially since Maureen Kondik is going to be actually not just a speaker, but the speaker receiving the St. Albert Award and speaking at 5 p.m. on Saturday of the conference.
Yeah.
So I'm a little perplexed by her talk title, which is going to be "Human Beings Are Defined by Organization." That's one of those titles, and to be fair, there are a number of titles on this this program that could go a number of different directions.
That's probably what makes it so much fun, the multidimensional aspect of a lot of these speakers' knowledge.
Yeah. I mean, I have to admit, having given a few scientific talks myself, there is certainly the tendency to, let me make this a little bit vague, just so that if I decide I want to put something else in, if I change my mind about, or if I have no idea really at the moment the abstract is due, what I actually want to talk about, let me give myself some wiggle room. So
right.
That can happen. And especially, and I can only imagine for someone much later in their career than myself, I'm sure Maureen Kondik has about 5 hours worth of stuff she could talk about if she chose to. So it's a question of what she decides she wants to say to this particular audience. So
yes, and I saw in the description of Professor Kondik that she's been a frequent presenter on many topics in many contexts, and I guess like all of these speakers, and like all of good science, it's there's a constant push to take that next step and to ask that next question. And it occurs to me that that's really kind of at the basis of our whole podcast from the beginning, isn't it? That there's not a moment in time when science is standing still. So the questions just keep coming and have to keep coming. That's probably part of why the titles for these talks are properly a bit not vague, but what's the right word? Evolving?
Evolving. I might use the word vague, slightly ambiguous, but evolving, flexible. Yeah. Flexible is a good word. That's
flexible is a good word. Yes.
Yeah.
And of course that ties in with the other question our discussions have implied. Whether in the grand theme of compatibility between religion and science and faith and science, how are we doing in the evolution department and the flexibility department in both of these fields? And is there a necessary element of flexibility and synchronicity in the movement of both fields?
In both the fields of
science and religion together, which is the great thing about this, the Society of Catholic Scientists, that they're willing to tackle that amazing kind of parallel process of both trying to evolve our understanding of both at the same time.
Yeah. And of course, at first my response to that was, people, think of religion as being this rigid thing and science as being flexible. And then I thought about it another few seconds. Actually,
right.
People's views, the scientific view that, science has all the answers to all of the questions. Well, and implicitly, it must have all the answers to all the questions already. And it's just a question of getting, these other mouth-breathing, semi-literate fools to, accept the rule of the science that we already know. I mean,
right.
Unfortunately, that seems to be the attitude on a lot of fronts. And, of course, it's the attitude we take about politics in general, for the most part, which is not really helping us anywhere.
Right.
But it's terribly popular. It is something that appeals to a certain aspect of human nature very, very strongly.
Yeah, it is.
Sometimes it's really amazing that we have ever had stretches of human history where that hasn't dominated to the degree that it does now, because it is so easy for us to fall into.
You're right. Yeah, you're right. The other thing that occurs to me as we look ahead to this conference, and I really am looking ahead to it with enthusiasm myself, is that on the religion side of the equation, the faith side of the equation, there's no better place to be hosting this conference
yes.
than the McGrath Institute, because McGrath kind of prides itself on being the center where some of the world's really outstanding and cutting-edge theological scholarship is going on all the time, and they're interested in seeing how these parallel paths, not parallel perhaps, but both,
they do intersect. They do come together and intersect and interface, and that is the issue.
Yes, exactly. Where are they parallel? Where are they intersecting? And where do they need to meet in a more constructive way rather than at a collision at an intersection somewhere? Right.
Yeah. A head-on or oblique impact, as the case may be.
Right.
Yeah. And that is the whole. You can, and people do have, adhere to forms of religion, whether Christian fundamentalists or other flavors of fundamentalists who are really, it can become a social construct that's simply adhered to out of inertia and out of a sense of tribalism. But that's the problem is that that's kind of become the implicit definition that most people use of religion. It's the subjective thing. It's a tribal marker. It's something I feel good about. It's part of my cultural identity. It doesn't make any truth claims. It can't possibly be ridiculous. It's of course all made up stories. And therefore it should not be, so apparently they're introducing a bill in the California Senate that would, actually demand that Catholic priests report cases of sexual abuse that they hear in the confessional. That would actually demand that they break the seal of confession.
My goodness.
And it's one of those things I'm surprised that hasn't happened more. I'm surprised that hasn't already happened more because, of course that's just this silly little superstitious thing that Catholics do, and there's no good reason for it. It's just a tribal marker. It's just a custom. I'm surprised that hasn't spread more than it already has. I'm grateful that it hasn't already spread more than it has.
Yeah, right. But all the more reason to be discussing all of these things now before the slippery slope really becomes just a downfall, as it were.
Yeah. Before we really fall off any further off the edge than we already have. I already think we're on a slope at a 45-degree angle, hanging on to some tree roots as it is.
Indeed.
But
it'll be to laugh. That's a good image. Yeah.
So. Yeah. We're going to see what happens.
Are there particular aspects of the conference that other particular aspects that?
I'm really, really looking forward to the Stephen Mithen talk, and I haven't gotten around to reading any of his books, which is unfortunate. But gosh, there's so many books to read. I don't know about you, Bill, but there's so many books to read.
I've noticed that too.
But so Stephen Mithen, and are you familiar with his work?
No.
Okay, he's an anthropologist, so he studies the sort of dawn of civilization era. So if I had to put, again, not being so familiar with his work, if I had to put some vague numbers on it, between about 5 and 20,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So that period of time between, which geologically is kind of the blink of an eye. That's the era in which at 20,000 years ago, the last glacial maximum was just starting to end, and by 10,000 years ago, the continental United States was ice-free, and then, it receded back across Canada over the next few thousand years, and has, fell back to the, pre-industrial state by, I don't know, probably 3,000 or 4,000 BC. So Stephen Mithen studies that time, and he studies, human cultural things, what we can find out about language, and the development of, I assume, writing, also music, I believe. And really is just trying to look at, what can we, I think ultimately the work, and of course he probably being a properly cautious scientist does not, make any claims about this, but his work bears on the question of, what is it that makes us human, right? When did we develop, what is this consciousness stuff that we have? Do we share it with anything else? Do we share it with apes? Do we share it with mammals? Does anything else have anything remotely resembling our free will? What's that like? And when did it come to be? Because, I think most of us, certainly Aristotle is like, no, man is the rational animal, and so we would be the ones with, so I think most Thomists would follow that line of argument. Qualia, the whole question of qualia, who has that? When did it develop? How can we tell?
Right.
And where do things like all of these human artistic, because of course those are so precious because those leave us something that we can see, right? So right. What can we tell from at least the physical residue of artwork from ancient humans, pre-civilization or the dawn of civilization? So he's going to engage with those topics in his talk. So becoming and being human, evidence from the archeological, fossil, and genetic records. So that's the real question: is what can we tell? Because it's not nothing. It's difficult. Like most interesting scientific questions, it's difficult. A lot of the evidence is gone, but there is some. Maybe a little bit ambiguous, but not completely. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then we will have several talks that deal with different aspects of what technology is doing. So Nick Austriaco, I'm really looking forward to him. I heard him interviewed, I think, on the Pints of Aquinas podcast last summer.
Really?
So he is a very bright guy. Obviously, he's a biologist at Providence College. And so he's going to talk about CRISPR and genetic engineering and all of the terrifying things that we can do with that. I mean, you've heard the whole brouhaha about the Chinese scientists who edited this gene for HIV resistance into a pair of twin girls.
Gosh, yes.
Yeah. So, which is an odd place to start, but there it was. So it's now apparently been done. And what else is going to be done? What could people potentially do with this? The 2:30 lecture is on Saturday. Is Connor Cunningham, who I'm not familiar with. He's more of a philosopher, I believe, philosopher and even theologian. But he's going to give a talk, an invited talk, and he's titled it, speaking of somewhat ambiguous or unclear titles, Homo Ex Machina. You caught that, didn't you? And Imago Dei, the nightmare dreams. What does that mean? What is he going to go with that? I don't know. But on the other hand, I am fascinated to find out. So
right.
So, and we'll have a talk. I hope that Darsha Narvez is able to attend, because we have at least one talk that sounds very relevant to her work on the neurobiology of emotions and human connectedness. So that's going to be late in the afternoon on Saturday. Sansol de la Caille. I can pretend that I can say that I can speak French well enough to get her name out. I think that's close to her name. Yeah. So, and then the Sunday morning talks. There are 3 half-hour talks, all of which sound pretty interesting. So the first one, I believe, is a graduate student named Megan Levis, who's at Notre Dame. Created in the image and likeness of man. Rather like Connor Cunningham's title. Where are you going to go with this? Where are you going to go with this? The next one is going to be, will tissue engineering change human nature? Which is one of those things I'm not, the term tissue engineering seems straightforward enough. You should have some idea what where that's going, but I don't know the full implications, and I'm eager to find out about that. And then the final one is that talk, evolution and the eschatological meaning of human nature, which is fitting for, an eschatological talk for the last talk of the conference. So that's nicely done. Nicely done. So, and that's somebody coming all the way over from Cambridge, Richard Austin Schote.
Huh.
So
there is isn't there an increased international involvement this
I think
year?
so, because Stephen Mithen is from Reading. Connor Cunningham is from the University of Nottingham, and Richard Schote is coming from Cambridge. So if by international you mean England, the United Kingdom, yes, it is a different nation.
We'll take it.
And Marie George is coming from St. John's. There's a St. John's in the United States. I think there's also a St. John's in Canada, and I almost think she's coming from the one in Canada. But don't quote me on that.
Okay.
And I don't know where Michael Flynn is from. He might be Canadian or something too. Couldn't tell you for sure. So he's going to be talking at the banquet. So that'll be interesting. Myself, as someone who dabbles in fiction writing, we will have a science fiction writer speaking at the banquet, and that will be intriguing too. So
yeah, I like that fact that a science fiction writer had been added to the equation.
Yes. Especially since we're going to talk so much about, we're going to hear so much about technology and things that in the 20th century, in the second millennium, would simply have been science fiction, and they are rapidly becoming not that. So
right,
and in many cases that will be unfortunate, but yeah. So that's an overview. It's a short conference. It's short and sweet. It's over in a day and a half. But it's going to be pretty crowded with people talking on fascinating subjects. And just the whole, I look forward again to that environment of actually being around. Can I actually say out loud that I'm not just a scientist, but that I'm Catholic? That's
right.
Nice. That is comforting. They do. There do need to be events like that for Catholic journalists too. I get the feeling, but I don't know.
Well, that's right.
That's been done.
It's funny you should mention that, because I happen to know that one of the other initiatives happening at the McGrath Institute is indeed something that would give more heft to Catholic media, Catholic journalism, realizing that something extra has to happen there too to confront changing times, or at least some kind of enhancement of the dialogue that the journalism at its best can engender.
Yeah.
We need it in science. We need it in journalism. We need it in politics. It's needed everywhere.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's nice that McGrath is doing it, and it's nice and exciting that the Society of Catholic Scientists is doing it.
Yeah. Well, we need both of those initiatives to get picked up and spread as far as possible, because there's just too much that humanity is missing out on by divorcing itself from the wisdom of Catholic tradition.
Right.
The tradition that the entirety of Western intellectual history has been routed through. It's simply, We've talked about that before, and we'll talk about it again. So.
Well, that's right, and with greater enhancement than ever after attending this conference, we just wanted to let our listeners know that there's lots of reason to be following this. There will be opportunities to follow the discussions going on via streaming or archived video, as well as attending.
Oh yeah, and there's some. I was looking at them today. There were some really good videos. There are several videos, not the complete set of speakers from the 2018 conference. And actually, you would need to look for Aaron Scherger, who, you could go check our episode on the content of Aaron Scherger's talk. And his talk was not one of the ones from the conference that made it into the archive, but they found him giving another talk with the same title, basically the same talk, I think, at another venue. So that's exciting. But there are several, and then there are several talks under their sort of other category. If you go to the CatholicScientist.org website, it's right up there. The video archive is right there on the front page, and you can see the 2017-2018 conference, and then also some videos, mostly of SCS. Well, I think they're all of people in the Society of Catholic Scientists talking on different subjects. Stephen Barr, Jonathan Mooney, who we're going to be talking to next week. We're going to have one more preview episode of for the conference, and we'll be talking to Jonathan Mooney, who's also on the board. I believe he's the vice president of the Society of Catholic Scientists, and we'll get his take on what's going on.
Yeah, that's going to be exciting. Yeah, he's definitely been one of the leaders in the Society's growth over the past few years, and the Society's outreach to the media. I've heard him on NPR and elsewhere. So, yes, may that connection to media continue, and the openness of media to the very interesting and problem-solving synergies between religion and science.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, we'll cut that one here for today. We'll look forward to that. And we thank you for listening, as we always do. And we'll look forward to next time.
Exactly. Looking forward to the conference and looking forward to our next conversation, Paul.
Yep. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, or it made you think, come on over to That's So Second Millennium's Facebook page and leave a comment or ask a question. We'd love to hear from you.